Welcome to Brave Inflections. My name is Claudelle von Eck. I have with me, again, thank you for coming back, Natasha Winkler, Dr. Natasha Winkler-Titus. She is a work psychologist. She has so much experience. The resume is this long. At senior executive level, both in South Africa and globally. She's also very involved in her society, and it's OPSA, the president-elect. So you're going to become president in August, I believe?
Yes.
That's soon. Yeah, and congratulations on another appointment in advance. Very, very, very grateful that you could spend some time with us today. The last time we had a conversation, you had so many important nuggets that you shared with us. We were talking specifically around where we are with this lockdown and how it's affecting people, what organizational leaders and HR practitioners should take into consideration. And we also had lots of advice for the president of the country. Which was absolutely fantastic and very important. And I do encourage you, if you haven't listened to that conversation, that you go and watch that video, especially if you are in a leadership position and you have to lead people through this change and uncertainty. If you are an HR practitioner, people's practices is what we're talking about these days, all right? So if you are in that space, please go and have a listen to that video. There's a lot of really valuable advice in there. Natasha, today I want to just focus a little more on your profession and the value of your profession. And the first question that I want to talk about, but I want to put on your table is the question around the future of work psychologists. With the advent of artificial intelligence and these things becoming smarter and smarter. And I think when we talk about singularity, there are different predictions, and some say about 2030, and hopefully I'll retire by then, but 2030, the computers are going to become smarter than us. What do you think that means for work psychologists? Will there still be a place for work psychologists in the future?
So, Claudelle, you're hitting on one of my favorite topics, and I most certainly think so, and I'm very happy to share my thoughts on that one. So in our profession and specifically in our society, we've been reflecting on this for quite a while. And I think like most professions, we're all unsure of what the future may hold, but we are positively unsure. I do believe, and as you said, technology is becoming smarter. We have smart devices, we have smart watches, and the question is, how relevant are we as human beings? In my view, we are still pretty relevant, and we will for a long time. What that then implies is a work psychologist is relevant, will be relevant, and will continue to. In fact, I do believe that work psychology will grow in prominence and impact as we go into the fourth industrial revolution and beyond. I think one of the first things that I just want to put out there, I am in too many discussions and debates and panels where people talk about the future world of work, and it is becoming a little bit of an irritation. It's not the future, we are living the future. It's here already. But there's still some perception where people believe that the future world of work is about having the device or having technology, and then even worse, from a workplace, we think it's about working collaboratively or having automation or automated processes. No, that is actually the second and the third industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution and new world of work is smart technology. It is not about automation or mechanization. So in essence, it's about integrating human and machine interface. So the machine is becoming one with the human. We are not working in a process in the one start and the other one stop. We are actually integrated. Your device is not something you put down and pick up. Your device is actually integrated and part of, in flow with your life as usual. So we really need to think about it in a different way. However, if we are saying there's a greater infusion between humanity and machines going forward, the future world of work, in my view, will therefore become a lot more complex, because simplified and standardized, even complicated work can all be automated or mechanized, which means we don't have to make regular routine decisions. But in terms of complexity, machines can only be as complex and complicated as we program them to be. So I believe that because humanity will be required to work at a greater level of complexity, it therefore implies that our humanity and our psychological adjustment and challenges will also become a lot more complex. The same for HR practitioners. What is now, the way we're dealing with people in the workplace now is through HR processes and systems and methods and policies. If all of that can be automated, where does that leave us? So it means there will be an even greater role for the work psychologists that understand psychological dynamics to engage and work in the workplace. So a few ideas around what the future may hold for IO psychologists. First of all, as I alluded to earlier, these days we do not talk about ourselves as IO psychologists, but rather work psychologists, because the world of work is shifting and where we are located is shifted. Work does not necessarily happen in one location or within one organization. We see the whole supply chain being quite interfaced. So that implies that an organizational psychologist may work across the supply chain, not only, or not the supply chain, the value chain rather, and work with different teams or with different organizations to collaborate on one delivery. The new world of work also requires a new kind of worker, because we have all this technology and all this means to work in different ways. So the type of worker, we talk about the gig economy, we talk about the virtual worker, we talk about the stay-at-home programmer. So we have different kind of workers, but it doesn't mean they stand away or separate from your organizational teams. Another element that I think will change quite a bit is the whole social dynamic. And I actually talk about the unsocial dynamic, because as much as we've got social challenges or dynamics in a live environment or with a work team, if you take it to a virtual area, it can actually become quite ugly. So we see it in bullying. Online bullying is actually 10 times worse than when people are face to face. So the unsocial dynamic, and I call it unsocial media, because as much as social media is supposed to be good for us, it brings in a very different and evil component in humanity. So that dynamic is shifting. In an organizational context or within an organization, you talk about a new psychological contract that is in place. So a psychological contract it goes above and beyond your normal contract of employment, but it is an emotional and psychological expectation the employee have with the company and the organization has from the employee. But what is happening with psychological contracts when we are all working in a virtual space or in a virtual dynamic? Virtual working also has a potential to bring social isolation. And we've seen, even before COVID-19 exposure, we have seen how the increase in use of social networks and platform has led to an increase in depression amongst young people and teens. So that social isolation can bring even greater levels of depression in the context of work. The meaning of work is changing. As we see already, your work and your life is so integrated and it flows between each other. So how does work contribute to meaning of life? Cross-cultural psychology. I mean, we know we live in a world where diversity and inclusion is still a challenge, even more so because the technology opens up boundaries and borders, so we can work in different teams with different people and in different time zones. So how do we navigate that? And then obviously the biggest thing, vocational psychology or career psychology. Different work means different skills, different competencies, and people will have to adjust. So that's why I think, Claudelle, it is extremely exciting. I do feel that the work psychologist should have an even greater role and impact going forward.
Thank you. So we're really in interesting times with all these changes and having to learn how to deal with technology and so forth. The one thing that I've observed that lockdown has shown those who have been very resistant to the concept of working from home, that it is doable, right? And so you may have quite a lot of people who prefer to stay at home now. It's like, now that I've tasted this, I'm not going back to the office. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day and just trying to learn from her the experiences. I'm listening to the experience that she's going, her colleagues as well, you know, in terms of how they're adjusting. And she said, well, some of them feel actually quite comfortable that they've now avoided toxic environments. You know, so working from home could be that you now move from your very nice office space to a toxic environment. So you touched it in the previous video a little bit, and you know, so people who are having to deal with gender-based violence. But it could also be the opposite, that being at home also means that I no longer have to deal with the toxic environment. So a lot of people may feel, like, this is it, I prefer this. So what advice do you have for leaders who now have to transition and have to learn how to manage their teams remotely?
Yes, again, one of my favorite topics. So at a personal level, if there's one phenomenal thing that's come out of COVID-19 and lockdown, it's just opening up the platforms and the capability that we have as humanity to engage in different ways. And as I said, you've seen people embracing it. I even have my church cell group that do virtual. We have these Bible studies and meetings virtually, and older people that have learned to embrace technology. And we still feel a sense of family and togetherness. And yes, we miss the touch and the hugs and just, you know, being present, but we've certainly haven't lost any connectivity. So I believe it's doable. I think it needs to be embraced. I always say we need to make the technology work for us. I think we still live in a society where we work for our devices. You know, you're a slave to your emails. You're a slave to checking all your social devices. Well, that wasn't the purpose. The purpose was all these things were supposed to make your life easier and seamless. So you don't have to go to the airport 2 hours in advance, because you could do everything online and arrive there and out of the Uber onto the plane seamlessly, not stopping anywhere. So that's how you should use. So yes, I am, and I actually call it virtual collaboration. I do webinars and I do training, and I'm also in the process of finalizing an assessment where organizations can assess their readiness for virtual collaboration. And the reason why I call it virtual collaboration is because it's not mimicking the office environment. It's not taking the organization and dumping it into a home environment. It is saying this is a new way of working, and it could work beyond just your organizational team as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunities and possibilities. But there are two things. So you mentioned it a little bit, but when we think about virtual collaboration, I think there's a lot of focus on the technology side of it. Are we set up? Do we have the devices? Are we connected? Have we got collaborative technological platforms that we can work on? But I don't think we give enough attention to the psychology side of it. So, Claudelle, as much as you say, there are people that have embraced it, that love working at home, that want to continue with this, I've also heard people saying, this is too much. I'm Zoom fatigued. I'm zoomed out now. It's just too much. The demand for my attention, because, people are not seeing me, so they have to Skype and WhatsApp and Zoom the whole day. You get people that are, and it's also quite, from an ergonomics perspective, it's very unhealthy, because we could literally sit in this room, in this corner, 7-8 hours a day. So there are pros and cons, and that's why we have to look at the psychology around it as well. First of all, that I would say is everybody should just be gentle on themselves. This is a new space. This is a new dynamic. Let's embrace it. Let's not put pressure on people. Let's laugh it off. If you're in a meeting and somebody drops off or somebody starts speaking, but they forgot to unmute themselves, let's just have a giggle and, laugh with the person, not at the person. But, like with everything, let's gently ease into this and embed it in our new way. In an organizational context, there's a term, especially in mining. In the mining industry, we always talk about visible felt leadership. That is really just leading or managing by walkabout. And in the mining, we were quite extreme. We would actually enforce it. So every morning between 7 and 9 is VFL time. No meetings allowed. You as manager must go and walk around. Sometimes it felt a bit, artificial, but it forced them to have that connection. So visible felt leadership, the intent was to connect with your people at a different level, not about work, not about the task, but who are you? What are your strengths? What's your interest? What motivates you? Because really, Claudelle, the only way to lead people is to have a relationship. It's not to be good at your job. It's not to know what we need to do. Have a relationship and then give people a vision and purpose to work. So if we have that trust and we have that relationship, to take that into a virtual space will be seamless. It'll be easier. Okay. Another thing that I've learned that is greatly exaggerated in a virtual space, and we call it the amplification principle. If you are a bad leader in the office, you're going to be a horrible leader in virtual space. There is no getting around that. If you are a great human being, you are going to be a superhuman being in the virtual space as a way of amplifying everything. So it is what it is. It's like 3D and all those things. It makes things bigger and better. So that's the reality. You're not going to overcome human issues or problems in the office space. So you talk about bullying or a toxic work environment. You can take that same toxic work environment in a virtual space. Okay? So you have to deal and understand those things. As a leader, control is out. We've known for many years. I mean, in the literature, we even talk about management versus leadership. It's not the same. Management implies control. So we've always known leadership is not about control. In a virtual space, even less so. You cannot control people remotely. I can make up 100 excuses. Oops, sorry, I dropped off. Oops, my connectivity is gone if I don't want to talk to you. So there must be trust. You need to give people autonomy around their work schedules and how they work. I observed in the beginning of the 21 days how company tried to enforce this. I heard of one company where people weren't even allowed to go to the shops during work hours. Now, I mean, that's taking it to the ridiculous in my view. But that was the realities of where companies were finding themselves. Suddenly I have to trust you people. You're going to do work at home. But it spoke to so much more than, it's the corporate culture that was just not ready for it. So allowing people or giving people that autonomy, there's also an art in finding the right balance, because you have to give somebody autonomy, but at the same time, and support. So it's just give them a frame and be there for them, but then empower them. So you have to find that happy medium that works for different people. And again, personalities and different individuals have different needs where that is concerned. Some need more structure and some needs less structure. Some are more task focused, so they want to get into the job. Others are more relationship focused. So first ask me how I'm doing before you ask me how the job is doing. So you have to appreciate all the personalities. We spoke about boundaries earlier, and boundaries become even more, because the thing is, with the devices, we are an always-on generation. Robin Sharma talks about the weapons of mass distraction. Is that we just, there's information coming all over, and we are all very mindful of mindfulness nowadays, because you have to literally force yourself to shut down. So with all this, if you work in the technology space, I find the same. I am behind my laptop, but I've got my WhatsApps coming up on my computer. I've got my emails popping in. I'm in a Zoom call, so there's 100 things happening at the same time. I've got this beautiful clean desk, but on my desktop, I've got about 100 tabs open. And just seeing that is equal to a cluttered desk. It makes me, it consumes me, and it makes me feel frazzled. So just create boundaries and organize yourself. There's a new thing. You spoke about toxic workplaces. We also know that employee wellness is a big emphasis. A lot of companies look after their employee wellness. But now working in a digital or a virtual space brings a new term. We call it digital wellness. We don't know what digital wellness are. We don't know what the psychological impacts are going to be of people working in a virtual space. So digital wellness will then also be something we have to look out for and manage as an organization. You mentioned it when we were chatting earlier about being an introvert and thinking, wow, this is amazing. And I laughed a little bit, because I waited for this whole thing to go its course, because everybody that was introvert thought, blessings from heaven, and everybody's extrovert said no. And sometimes it has very little to do with that. I think we stereotype when we put labels on people. And again, just because you're an introvert does not mean you do not need to feel engaged. Doesn't mean you don't need to feel like you belong. So things like engagement and a sense of belonging to the team and the purpose is equally important, whether you're introvert, extrovert, task-focused, relationship-focused. So engagement is even more important, especially because we are not there, we're not in the office, we don't see each other, we have to do these video calls to see each other. And I have found, and most of the HR executives that I've been speaking with, that's probably the biggest challenge. They are exhausted because they have to put in extra effort to make everybody feel connected. And to a point that you made earlier, what about their own emotions and their own fatigue? So that sense of belonging, we have to find ways of making sure that's still happening. And we can't put it all on the leader, because the leader's also got only so much time. I have found that the whole way we think about and we do performance management is different in a virtual space. So that on its own is a conversation separately. Performance is different. You have to shift to more focusing on the output and the delivery as opposed to what's being done and the schedules. You have to think about rewarding and recognizing people. So performance is something that needs a whole different way of doing. And then the most important thing is, do not try and mimic the office environment. It's not this, don't think it's taking the desk and now I've got a desk. It's a whole new way of being and living and working, and design it and craft it with your team to come up with things that will work, again, in your context and in your environment. Yeah. So, and as I said as well, I've heard people throw this term around. They are Zoom fatigued. They are literally exhausted of all the screen time. So jazz it up a little bit. Don't just have meeting after meeting after meeting. I mean, something as simple as just calling it something else. Instead of having a meeting, have a think tank, open space collaboration session. We encourage people to put the laptop on a table and then stand for the 15 or 20 or hour. Don't sit behind their desk, because it's a brainstorming session. Jazz up your platforms. Don't just use one platform so people can become Zoom fatigued. So have a variety of technologies. Have a WhatsApp video call with 2 of your colleagues and have a cup of coffee and just catch up. And think about, when do you have to have meetings? You do not have to have a meeting or a session for every single task. So if you think about the task to technology matrix or relationship, apply your mind to when you want to use different platforms. For example, if you just want to exchange information, you can just send an email or send a memo with something. You don't need to have a video call just to share information. But then again, if it's important for you to build a relationship or brainstorm or discuss a complex issue, you're not going to put that in an email. You would preferably want a phone conference, even better, a video conference. Use the platforms that are available. I mean, Office 365 creates an entire environment where people can collaboratively work on documents. They can even work on the same document in real time. So be smart about the different technology that's available, and be smart about what it is you are trying to achieve in this communication or in this collaboration, and be appropriate for the times you want to get together.
Wow, I mean, that's quite a mouthful, and a lot of things that we need to consider. But as you were talking, the one thing that I keep on wondering, and this is something that's been bothering me for a while, is how do you build a coherent culture? So you've talked about, how do we keep it interesting for people? If you're going to be collaborating online, but if you have people working remotely, and you don't have the in-person interactions, how do you build that coherent culture, or do we run the risk of being rudderless?
Yeah. So Claudelle, for me, the principles are the same in terms of establishing an organizational culture. We mustn't forget that at the end of the day, what is an organizational culture? It is understanding what is your identity, what is the beat of the organization. So each organization has a unique blueprint, fingerprint, organizational identity. That identity is made up of, why do we exist? In other words, what's our purpose? And organizations call it a mandate, but we are moving toward more being purpose-driven as opposed to a mandate. What is our purpose in life? With the purpose, what are the values? And when we talk about values, it's not that stuff that's on the wall or that's in pictures. It's the agreed, the consensus words and phrases and behavior that governs how we do things here. It's also made up of our structures, our systems, and our process. And oftentimes companies forget about that. They think if we've if we have a nice purpose statement and we've got these 5 funky words and everybody can recite them, we have a culture. But the culture, that is, if that's kind of your DNA or your thinking, the doing, the behavior is what happens. So if, let's say, for example, our purpose is to feed the nation. I mean, let's say we Pick n Pay. Our purpose is to feed the nation, or, you know, empower people to have healthy food. Our values are, we're going to have quality type of food. We can have dignity and respect for all humanity, blah, blah, blah. Now, let's say, for example, Pick n Pay has got trucks that are not of a high quality, or they don't have all the infrastructure to keep the food fresh. And then they go and deliver food. So when they get to deliver at the different outlets, the food quality has deteriorated. So that's an example of how your systemic stuff or processes or methods is not in line with your value system. So oftentimes people forget that their organizational structures, the roles that people play, the tools that they use. Let's say we have a value of collaboration, but then people are sitting in different parts of the world and they have no way of communicating with each other. How am I going to collaborate with you if I can't communicate with you? So all of those things make up an organizational culture. So those are the basic building blocks. If you now take those things into a virtual space, that's the same principle that I have to apply. So you have to ensure that your identity is established and enforced, and it's lived through the people in the organization and how they make decisions and how they do their work. Another important way to think about cultures, I think when you work in a collaborative space, a culture of creativity and generosity is important. Creativity, because we are in a new world, in a new space, so we have to think about new ways of working. The old is not going to work, which means you have to be open to explore. And when you explore, it means sometimes you're going to make mistakes. So you have to give people that room to trial and error and try different things and say, Zoom doesn't work for me. Can I have a WhatsApp video call? And just allow, flexibility. And also a culture of generosity, because people have to share. If I'm sitting in my house, you have no control. You don't know what's happening. You don't even know what I'm wearing, So you cannot control. You have to be generous in your trust, generous in your resources, and allow people to make mistakes. Again, this is not new because we live in an era of Google. So there's no mandate on knowledge. There's no mandate on intelligence. Everything is open access and free for everybody. So hoarding anything is an old way. And this is not new. I mean, Nelson Mandela told us, Africa is a rich continent. If everybody just took enough for themselves, we shouldn't have a problem. There's enough for everybody. So if we can instill those principles, also watch out for resistance, and that's just normal in change management. So resistance and how people behave is going to have to be managed. I alluded to it, but your traditional systems of ways of doing, just think about this. I've actually, in the process of lockdown, I've signed quite a few contracts, important documentation, and we have to be okay with the virtual signature. And companies have got amazing SAP platforms and systems, but it's amazing the paperwork that still goes across a line manager's desk. So if you are going to take your organization more virtual, try and become a bit more paperless. Rethink how things are done, and if the technology can enable a better way, embrace it and embed it. Watch out for group consent. We think we are quite individualized because we are now all working on our own, but I think because we are so independent and on our own, there's an even greater need to reach out, to belong, to be part of a group. So when you sit in a meeting, and I'll talk about that a little bit, what happens with different types of people. It's very easy to have group consensus if you're not with the team or if you can't see them. So Claudelle, let's look a little bit at some of those differences. So yes, we have to really think about different personalities and different preferences as well. But yeah, I just want to emphasize something, Claudelle. We have to be very careful with overinterpretation. I've got to be in my bonnet with stereotyping. And earlier we spoke about the introvert and the extrovert, and the task-focused person versus relationship-focused person. And it's good to understand people in these categories that the psychologists give us. But once you understand that, we also have to be careful of over-interpretation. So I want to talk a little bit about relationship management in a virtual world. And I want to go away from our usual labels because I think we've done them. And I want to go a little bit broader in terms of diversity and inclusion and just highlight a few of those diverse types that we have. So I like to talk about the technophobe. And with all due respect and apology to whoever's listening, but there is this thing where a lot of people would say, oh, the older generation resists technology. And I want to cut that off completely because I've worked with quite a few people that are quite advanced in age that have no problem embracing technology. However, a technophobe could even be a young person. It is just that individual that just are so scared and they believe they are going to break the internet if they touch or do anything. So when you work in virtual teams, try and be mindful and try and figure out who are the guys that are so scared of pressing the wrong button or looking silly or doing something stupid. And make sure they are not losing out because they are scared of embracing technology. And give extra attention and extra care to create a learning environment where everybody's allowed to fail and try out new things. Then obviously you also have the talkative participant. I mean, we have them in the office, but in a virtual space, worse because you can't do anything. Sometimes I just mute them, but then I'll make a joke of it. But the talkative participant will just talk over everybody's head, and I'm not going to go too much there. So figure out ways to manage and deal with that in the context. When I have a large group that I'm working with, I try to also have different, so I would have one or two other people working with me in the session to facilitate some of these dynamics that you can't always observe. For example, they would notice when somebody's been quiet for a long time and just alert me so that I can, in a subtle way, introduce or bring that person into the conversation. Or they will also, for example, we could have all the participants on a WhatsApp group and send a private message to the individual, just making them aware that they are dominating a little bit. Then you have the opposite, the silent participant. And silence does not always have to be interpreted as negative. The person is not angry or upset or whatever. Sometimes they just happen to agree with what's being said and feel they don't need to add anything additional. When they do, however, speak, they would make an impact. But watch out for that, whether it's silence because they agree or silence because they are upset or annoyed or maybe don't know how to unmute themselves. And also just engage them and use different methods. Some people don't like the sound of their own voice, so allow them to use the chat function. And then obviously there is the resistant participant that just do not want to embrace. They just longing back for the good old days when they sat for 2 hours in traffic and just to come and sit and drink office coffee and be with the team. So they are really not getting over this. So yeah, I think, Claudelle, we just have to embrace that there are different individuals and there is no one size fit all, but managers need to learn all these different dynamics and understand it so that they can help the full team to transition to a new way of being.
Thank you, Natasha. So we're really going through a significant societal shift. I mean, we all feeling it, and it's what's interesting in terms of this significant shift that we're all feeling. It's not just here in South Africa. The whole world is going through this simultaneously. And with the shift, of course, I think that there's been lots of conversations around things like the inequality gap that has now once again had the spotlight on it. There's some old bad habits that we probably should leave behind. Can you talk to us about some of the bad habits that you think that we should leave in the old and not take to the new reality?
So, Claudelle, and I think this would probably be my closing few remarks that I share. I'm going to start off with the bad habits. I think, and you've probably figured out that I hate stereotyping and I hate putting people in boxes and all that. And again, this is now, it's almost applying I have a universal idea of what is bad. And as much as I think, yes, that's why we can have ethics and we can have values, but we have to be careful in what we define as a universal idea or universal concept of bad. So I think I would plead the fifth a little bit and be careful of what I say around bad habits. And I think earlier I alluded to this example. You know, so take the two of us. We don't have children, and our sense of purpose and significance in life, one way that we live through that is through our professions. I mean, our vocation becomes our purpose in life. So when I work long hours or I work on weekends, and at the moment about 70% of what I do with my time is not income generating. It is about, supervising interns. It is about giving back to my society. It is doing these type of engagements. Because I have a strong sense of I need to give back. I need to contribute to the professional development of people. Now, for me, that is equally important to a mother or a father spending the time with their children. So if we have this, general sense of spending long hours in work is bad, it's complicated because, for a mother and a father with small children, it is bad to spend long hours in an office environment and not sufficient time with your children. That's bad. For you and I that don't have that, we have a different filter. So I'm always very cautious of just saying this is bad and that's not bad. So I just wanted to make that little bit of careful about a universal idea of bad. But if I can be so brave to reflect on a few things that I've observed during lockdown that I really think we can do better as humanity. I've obviously got to be in my bonnet about this whole selfie generation. And selfie is a method of taking a photo, but it brings with it a whole different idea or concept of or being at the moment that is so self-centered, me, myself, and I, the world revolves around me, that comes with that as well. And it's I'm not making a judgment that all young people are self-centered, but there is a culture that almost supports and permeates an idea of self-centeredness. And like with any disaster or pandemic, it does throw all of that away. And we realize how codependent we are. So that is definitely something I would wish for, that we take it with us, that we learn to realize that I am because of people around me, and we take that Ubuntu-ness or our Africanness with us through this. And it also comes back to my mantra of significance. It's what's his name? Maxwell said, you know, when your success is when you achieve and you've reached your goals. Significance is when through your own achievement you can empower or enable or allow others to also achieve. And that's taking success to the next level, and that is what significance is about. And that's what that's my hope for humanity, that we all live a life of significance. Then also just, I think every person, every individual need to take the time to reflect, active reflection. As we filtering through the levels now, we are starting to re-engage back into normal. People are going back to workplaces. Yes, there's lots of rules, etc. But it's really my hope that people would take a moment to reflect, and each of us to just say, what was the good? So as I said, suddenly, because you're only allowed to go for exercise between 6 and 7, so suddenly you had families walking around the park. But I mean, isn't that just normal good behavior for families to spend quality time with each other? For us not to rush, for us not to travel so much that we kill the earth, you know? My husband and I, because we're single, we live a very flexible life. We travel a lot. So we always say the first quarter of the year is ridiculous. I mean, almost every second weekend we're away from home because it's this cycling event and that cycling event and this running event. So up until about April, we would usually have had about 5 trips to Cape Town. And that's it's not work related, it's weekends down, up and down. With lockdown, we had 1 trip and that was it. And you know what? We didn't even miss it. We didn't miss it at all. So we sat back and said, but do we need to travel so much? Do we need to? It's good, but it's also good to just be at home or do different things. And we all know the footprint that all our carbon usage and our travel has on the earth. And yeah, let's rethink. And then lastly, I think, so once you've reflected and you've decided, look, some of these things I would want to, you know, everybody's now been so obsessed with cooking and baking and training and exercise and everything. So continue with it. But once you've decided on 1 or 2 habits that you would like to instill, remember, and we all know, you know, a habit is formed in 21 days at least because you have to have repetition. But more than that, you only change when you change your mindset. So just doing something differently is not going to be embedded in a new way of being. You actually have to change in your mind about how you think about that thing and why it's important. And you need to have an emotional connection to that. Then your behaviors. And then you need to put stuff in place, the systems, the structures that'll support you until it becomes a habit. So to instill some of these new behaviors and new habits, we must start with a shift in mindset. So I think, yeah, that's probably how I could end.
Thank you very much. I think what comes through very strongly in what you're saying is that each of us need to have some real active reflection around what are those things that we need to change, but it's the active reflection causes a mind shift because you need to shift your mind on it, and then it becomes with practice a new habit. But it would be such a waste of a good crisis if we come out on the other end and we haven't left some things behind that we should have left behind. And I think it was very poignant of you to point out the fact that what is bad for you is not necessarily bad for me. You know, so we can't just put everybody in one basket, but everybody has for themselves have to figure out What are those things that are bad for them? And I suppose it also takes a little bit of brutal honesty with self in that reflection, because it's not always easy to admit to myself that that habit of mine is actually a bad habit. And to think about things like, how do I impact on the environment? Not other people, me. And having that honest conversation with self. Um, Dr. Natasha Winkler-Titus, thank you so much for spending the time with me on Brave Inflections. For those of you watching this video, if you missed the other recording that we had with Natasha, please go and have a listen to that. There are so many important nuggets in there, real good lessons for leaders and HR practitioners and so forth, and in terms of taking your people through the change and uncertainty that we're going through now. So please do yourself a favor, go and have a listen to that video. Thank you so much once again, Natasha. Really appreciate your insights.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it as well, Claudelle.
Thank you.